your eyes are feeling all your love, telling all those lies.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and for this episode I'm joined by Jeff Slate, whose album The Last Day of Summer is out now. We have some very interesting connections, and I hope you enjoy listening to our conversation in which we chat about those. What you're listening to now is Heartbreak, which, as you will find out, is a very interesting start of The Last Day of Summer. Enjoy listening to our conversation.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good,
right.
Thanks, Jeff. How are you?
I am awesome. There we go.
Excellent, good. But welcome to Harmonious World. It's a real pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So, Jeff Slate, we've got a lot of kind of mutual friends and mutual musical acquaintances and things.
Many, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated.
How we've never connected before, actually, kind of boggles my mind when I looked at, yeah, I don't know how you sort of came up in something, and then I was like, how have we not crossed paths? Because well, we'll get to this, but anyway, you asked the questions.
So tell me, so you're in New York. Have you always been in New York? Pretty
much. I mean, I ended up here in 84, 85. I was pretty young. I'd been in a band up in Connecticut as a teenager. And that, it went incredibly well. In like an 18-month period, we did all the things a band wants to do. We toured around and we made an album and a single, and, it started to sort of explode. But as things do when you're 17 or 18 years old, it imploded, right?
Right.
And I thought, well, I'll come to New York and I'll just recreate that magic, which, it's not that simple. It took a very long time to find people who were like-minded and, had the same sensibility, right? I think that's the thing, and when you're young, you're in a band, it's a gang, more than anything else. And that's fun. That's the best part of it. And by the time I'd gotten to New York, even though everybody I was working with was pretty young, it was, New York's a very professional place. People are, and that was a good experience, but it took a minute to figure out that people weren't in it for the fun of it. They were, they had, I had ambitions, but I was a songwriter and singer and so forth. And when you're a bass player or a drummer or whatever it is, your ambitions are very different, I think. And that's, I'm not saying anything negative about drummers and bass players. I'm just saying it's, they want to make a living. And as a front person or a songwriter, you're trying to get heard. It's sort of a different dynamic. So that took a really long time, and it wasn't till sort of 93, a lot of slogging around and playing on, whatever came my way, and doing my own gigs and trying to figure out what kind of artist I was and wanted to be. But it wasn't really till 93 when I met Pete Townsend. He produced some demos for me that, it kind of started to fall into place. And even then it took another 5 years, really.
Yeah. How would you define success? I mean, I'd say you are one, but how would you define it? For you?
Yeah. I actually remember really vividly being in a coffee shop in Greenwich Village with my girlfriend at the time in the late 80s. And I saw Elvis Costello sitting, having a coffee and reading the newspaper or something like we used to do. And and nobody bothered him. Nobody really even noticed him. This was sort of pre-collabing with McCartney and Baccarat. It's like he was
Yeah.
Elvis Costello, but he could be anonymous, I think. Right. And I remember saying to her and thinking this afterward, that, how great to be able to, fill any room you wanted to fill, to be able to play the kind of music you wanted to play, be able, to be a writer of that caliber and be respected by your peers. And just, beyond this trajectory that I felt was, even then, sort of unrelenting and unremitting. He was just doing exactly what he wanted to do. And yet he was able to be almost completely anonymous. And I think, I don't have that level of success, but I'm able to make a living, and I have people that I respect, who think highly of my art. And I don't play to empty rooms, and and people listen to me on Spotify. Not that that's puts money in your pocket, and they buy merch and stuff like that, which is all great for the ego. But I think being able to make a living and also be able to live a life as a normal person in 2024 is as a musician in particular, that's a pretty good trick. I just don't feel like, I'm in the gray area where I get recognized places, and that does happen, but mostly I can be anonymous, like that story. And yet I can make a living doing this job that I love so much. So I think that's pretty successful. Not to say I wouldn't want more people to hear my music or more people to recognize my greatness, but it's it's a double-edged sword. So.
So The Last Day of Summer is out now.
Well, it's out the 17th, but
okay. By the time this comes out, it'll be out.
By the time this comes out, take two. No, go ahead.
So and that it really is uncanny that, I mean, it's literally got everybody on it that I've ever played with, and or they've played with people that I've ever played with. You got Steve Craddock on there. You got Dave Stewart, Mick Talbot. I mean, it's really uncanny. So, so I know there's a little bit of a story about the songs being written. So tell my listeners about that.
Yeah, well, look, I've made many records in my lifetime, almost all of them, except for the stuff that I did with Townsend in the 90s, which we used a lot of his Psychoderelict era band, who were English. Most of my records have been made with either bands I've been in or, New York or sometimes LA musicians. And that's great, but the music I grew up loving was either kind of old school soul, Delphonics and Stylistics and OJs and things like that, or this kind of that R&B influenced English rock. So the Who and the Kinks and the Small Faces were huge, and then later, the Jam and certainly the Clash fall into that category as well, because they were sort of endlessly changing styles, and the Style Council and like that. And I think, so that was always my sensibility. And I worked with a drummer named Steve Hawley, who'd been in Wings for a minute, and he lives here in New York now. And he had something that I always felt American players didn't have. He had a sensibility, but a swing to him that's very different. And look, I played with some amazing drummers in my life, but Jim Keltner and Steve Ferroni and all great American drummers. But there was something about Steve's way of playing. So I worked with Earl Slick, who is in Bowie's band and worked with John Lennon and so forth. And we were going to go out on tour at the end of 2020. And so we were scheduled to make a record in sort of late spring 2020. And I'd been on the road, and right at the tail end of February 2020, I finished those dates and, had the schedule out in front of me for 2020 into 21, and it all got wiped away in a hot minute when COVID hit. And so I, like everybody, I didn't know what to do. I did these weekly online concerts. I did about 40 of them, 50 of them. That was, really satisfying, and raised a lot of money for charities and things. But, we were all sitting at home with not much to do. And I had the material for the record, but I thought to myself, well, I've never not been on a deadline before. So why don't I just keep writing,
Yeah.
And so I did, just to kind of test if this could work. I did one song, a song called Heartbreak, that came out, I guess, fall 2020. And I sent it to Ben Gordelier, who is, in Paul Weller's band.
Yeah.
And, I just gave him like acoustic guitars and a scratch vocal and sent it to him. Slick added some guitars. I had some Lee Harris from Saucer Full of Secrets put some guitars on. Duff McKagan added some bass. So it was all over the world. And I gave it to this guy, Dwayne Lundy, to mix it. And he had to sort of make sense of this jigsaw puzzle that I gave
Yeah.
him. Really. And because, you overtrack when you're not in the same room. You're just trying to, they're trying to give me what they want, but they also want to try and give me their ideas, which is good. It's a lot of times you're putting things together. And so that song came out, and the reaction was very positive, and I liked it. And I thought, well, I'm going to double down and try to make all the songs as good as this, because the feedback from the musicians I was working with was very positive. And, not that they're, not that they'd be unkind, but, they wouldn't be as effusive if they just, or they wouldn't play on it,
Exactly. Yeah.
If they didn't like it. So it was a good experience, and it kind of spurred me to keep writing, which I did. And I kept that process going for the next year and a half, where, if I heard Mick Talbot on a track, I would contact Mick and say, hey, and I did a podcast last night, and a guy asked me, who is that keyboard player on that song Moving On? And I told him, and I don't think he was super familiar with this. I mean, he knew the name, the Style Council, but he didn't. He's an American. And he was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to look them up. I'm like, you really are. you're kind of missing something here. And Craddock, I wanted him to play guitar, and he chose to play piano on this track.
Well, yeah.
And then and I also said, oh, you didn't put any backing vocals on. He goes, this song doesn't need backing vocals. And I'd really heard it a different way, but Ben had put on a particular kind of drums and also put on an upright bass, which is really weird. And it gave the song a different flavor. So it kind of pointed in a different direction. I understood what Steve was talking about. So, I think that process, and then getting to the end, and again, trying to make sense of that jigsaw puzzle myself, but also for the guy who mixed it, was just a really satisfying process. But I think to more directly answer your question, I had always wanted to make a record, with, musicians who understood my reference points, not just casually, but in a really deep way. The second track we did was The Poacher by Ronnie Lane. We just released it for his birthday, and that was Craddock and Ben and, some other people. And, those guys knew what I was doing. They knew I didn't want it to do it like Ronnie. They knew I wanted to do my own thing and make it more rock and roll and a kind of hooey vibe. But they knew who Ronnie was. They knew the song. I didn't have to play him the song. They didn't even have to learn the song, So that was a really satisfying experience. And the end result has a flavor, a swing. It's kind of imbued with different colors and textures, I think, that if I'd made it with the people I play with, as my live band or regular, and I'm not saying anything negative about American musicians. It just suited the sensibility of the material I was writing and where I was. I was sort of, this very much feels like a new chapter to me, a little bit of a manifesto for maybe the next phase of my career. And I wanted it to sound a particular way. And I was very much going back to the music during the pandemic that I loved as a kid. You know,
Right.
all those reference points I talked about. And you know, not that American musicians don't know those people, but you know, if I say the Delphonics to Steve Craddock, you know, he can name 10 songs off the
Yeah.
top of his head, or Mick Talbot, or
Yeah.
Ben for that matter. You know, I mean, I think that meant a lot to me as a creative person, particularly when you're working long distance.
Yeah. And I think there was something in the pandemic about people being able to work with other people, because we suddenly went, you know, you don't have to actually be in the same room to have
Yeah.
that creative experience. And I think, although obviously it is much better, you know, if you could pay all those guys to come to New York to do it in the studio, then fab.
Yeah.
But actually, because you couldn't.
No, I do it. If I did it, I'd do it at Black Barn, which Slick and I may actually do at some point, Paul Weller's studio.
Yeah.
But you know, because I do it on their home turf, because it would feel different for me, especially. But yeah, I mean, I've done the long distance thing many times. I've tracked things piece by piece, and I've been very dictatorial about what I wanted because I felt like I had to be. This was a different, you know, and a lot of times those basic tracks were cut in a room and then you were layering on them. So there was sort of a template going forward. You know, again, this was sending guys tracks and letting them do what they do because I trusted them,
Right.
and knew that we had a shared points of reference. Look, you know, I interviewed, after David Bowie died, I interviewed a bunch of the people who worked with him. And I talked to Mike Garson, and he said he had a great line about David, that he always felt like he was a casting director, and that if he wanted a particular sound, well, I'll call Mike Garson for that, or I'll call so-and-so for this, or I'll call, you know, Carlos Alomar for this, or Earl Slick for this, or, you know, it was like, you know, he knew the sound in his head, and he couldn't do it himself, but he knew the people who would share that sensibility and would give him back what he imagined, but better. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that was what was so special about this experience for me. Plus, nobody said no, everybody was home. You know,
yeah, exactly.
Nobody wasn't, you know, nobody was working. Everybody was off the road. So it wasn't, I mean, between Ben and Jeremy Stacy, that's like what, you know, 10 or 12 drum tracks on the record. Those are guys who are incredibly busy guys. And they, you know, they had time and a half to do this.
Yeah, exactly. At this point in the podcast, I would like to play some of Moving On, because I really like that track.
Between the lines on my face, between the sadness and grace, won't let the bitterness in. I won't let the pain win, and you're moving on. Late in the afternoon, in some stranger's room, dreaming of what never will be, of all the things you can't see, and you're moving on. Yeah, you're moving, you're moving, you're moving on. Yeah, you're moving on.
So how did you get that together?
Well, so I'd originally written a song that was loosely inspired by John Lennon's I'm Losing You and Yoko Ono's Moving On, that kind of double double A side, I guess, from Double Fantasy. And so I wanted, I mean, the lyrics aren't, I stole a line, but the lyrics aren't really related, but the vibe I was going for was that. But then, when I was playing, and it was just me with a guitar, when I got the drums back from Ben, he said, "Wow, I think you could sing this in a much higher register because it's an E." So I put it in A, but when you sing it that much higher up, that means it's a huge leap for people at home.
Yeah.
It really changes the feel of the song. And because the drums had such swing to them, I immediately heard it being a sort of, an old school soul song, like I was listening to at home in the pandemic. And so I laid down some guitars and got a woman named Boogie Cindy, who is in a Canadian band called the Boogie Wonder Band, to play some bass. And I contacted Mick Talbot because I wanted that sound, and he got it immediately. But he did both versions. He did sort of the bluesy version as well as the soul version. I said in the soul version, this is a keyboard solo, and I sort of imagined it being a Hammond solo, and he did a Rhodes solo, and it's so great. It's just so, and it's so Mick, and so special. And then we went into the studio. Things had loosened up as we were finishing things up, and that came pretty late in the process. And so the guys I used, so Slick had a guitar, and a guy named Don Miguel, who'd worked on a bunch of Leonard Cohen's very, very late albums, did some guitar. Mark Platty from David Bowie's band did some guitar. And I did the vocal in one take at Mark Platty's studio one day. I mean, there was a scratch vocal, but we just wiped that, and I just went through and sang it as though I was singing it live.
Right.
Because I wanted that sort of performance feel to it. And it's not a perfect vocal. I still hear the sort of anomalies in it, but that's okay too.
It is. And I think some of the classic tracks, there are things where the feel is so right that actually those little glitches don't matter at all.
Yeah, the imperfections are what make it special, and what make it human. We live in a world that everything is quantized and everything is sort of, auto-tuned, and everything's very, and I think there's bad notes and, funky hits and, whatever throughout the record. And they're not obvious. These are all super great people, but I didn't edit those out, right, because it sounds like human beings playing.
Yeah, exactly. So what's next then? Are you taking this out on the road? And how are you going to do that? Yeah.
Well, I think, here in America, I have a band that I've played with for most of them over maybe 6 or 8 years, that core band. And we're already playing the songs. We've got a bunch of shows coming up in May. It'll be interesting to see what songs people in an audience like, because we made this in an incubator.
Yeah.
So I've only played a few of the songs live because I've done some support gigs opening for people, sort of trying things out. And I've done some radio shows and so forth, playing the songs live. And I'm getting a sense of what works and doesn't work, and what, people are responding to emotionally. And then, we'll continue gigging throughout the summer. There's a lot of outdoor shows here,
Sure.
like there is there. And then, the idea is there's a whole bunch more shows we're going to do in October, but either in September or November to come over to the UK and, hopefully use a bunch of the guys we've talked about here on the show. There's I know the gaps in their schedules, and hopefully getting them. Steve is sort of the wild card. He's very busy, no problem. So I put out a message to Gem Arthur, because he's amazing and great and certainly could do it. And I'd like to bring Slick, but I think he's a busy guy too. But whatever it is, that core band will probably be, Ben and Jake and Tommy Van Heel, because they they can just step in and play this stuff
Yeah.
because they're a unit already.
Right.
And I love them. They're amazing guys. So, and I trust them. I think it's hard when you're traveling without your own band to play with people who you, as a front guy, you can kind of turn your back and know they're not gonna, it's just gonna happen.
Yeah.
And those are guys that it's, there's really no worry that they're gonna be able to do it.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I look forward to seeing you over on this side of the pond then.
Yeah, I'll keep you posted on the dates.
Yeah, please do.
It's all very, it's tough. Things have really changed with, Brexit and post-pandemic, and there's fewer clubs. There's the very small clubs, and there's a very large sort of theaters. But the clubs that are in the 300 cap range are, there's very, very few of them.
Right.
And they're booked way, way in advance. And the deals, frankly, as a traveling person, are not great. So you have to be really careful. It's not, I want people to come and I want them to experience it live, but I have to pay the guys at the very least, and that's, and you need to make some money, and it can't just be what you make on merch. It has to be, you have to be able to count on a certain amount to keep the tour going. So, I had a very ambitious idea of playing 10 or 15 dates. And really, that's going to be more like 8 in the markets that I know there's a crowd.
Sure.
And then, and then we can come back, and do more. Because this is going to, the way it works, whether we do some stuff at Black Barn or we don't, I'll be touring this record the way you do, until the wheels run off and I have to make another one.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's always people who go, oh, I've just had this new album by this guy, Jeff Slate. What, and you go, yeah, I knew about him ages ago or whatever. But yeah,
I mean, that's the funny thing, a lot of people in England in particular, in Germany, I think as well, Japan, know my old band, The Badge, saw us live because we gigged just, 2000 to 2005, we toured 3 or 4 times a year over there, where you are. Right. And I think that, we weren't playing big places, but it was a point, sort of post Britpop where people were going to see live bands still. They were willing to take a chance on people they didn't know. You could go, we would go and there'd be 50 people, and the next time there'd be 100. And then after that, you'd be playing the 200-300 cap rooms. And that, that was really, really gratifying experience. So I think, when I do shows like this and I mention that band, people are like, oh, I know that guy, and they don't realize I wasn't like, I played the bass and I did co-lead vocals. And so it's a different experience. This is much more Americana influenced music, my solo music. But I mean, I think you're right. I think there are people, but look, we just got word there's going to be a review in the July Mojo. Well, the record's coming out in May, so that's not optimal, but I'll take that. That's great. It sort of gives me another opportunity to promote it later on. Absolutely. In a way that I might, so, I mean, the guy who sent me the note and let me know was a bit, sort of apologetic, and I'm like, yeah. As long as you don't give it 2 stars.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Oh, fantastic. Well, it's really good. I'm so glad we finally connected.
Yeah. Now we're buds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mates.
Mates. Yeah. So when I come to New York or you come to the UK, we'll meet up and have a cup of tea.
I don't know if we're short on time, but you didn't ask the Dave Stewart story. You mentioned it.
Oh, yeah. No. We're not short on time. Yeah, let's talk about Dave Stewart, because I worked with Dave Stewart years and years and years ago.
You said that, yeah.
Yeah, such a great guy. So how did you get him involved?
Well, it was a funny thing. He was a guy that I had interviewed, and for my my side hustle, because back after the Badge imploded, I started writing about music, and I had a pretty formidable Rolodex, as we called it back then. So I was able to get a lot of people that other journalists couldn't get. And so it's my side thing to sort of, you know, when you're not on the road, you're not really making money now. I mean,
Right.
that really is the thing. Your residuals are very, very minimal. So I'd interviewed Dave and we just hit it off. And so I would periodically get these random texts from him. He'd send me like this strange video he'd worked on in the 80s or like 2000. I did this in 2000. I thought you'd like it. I'm like, but don't tell anybody. You know, it's just, you know, he's just that kind of guy. He's got boundless energy, he's super creative. He's got, you know.
Yeah.
And so we were texting. This is, you know, toward the tail end of the pandemic, and we were finishing, or right afterward, and we were finishing up the record. And there was a song on the record. And he said, you know, what are you doing? And I said, oh, you know, we're finishing up the mixes, and there's this one song that I just can't crack. You know, it feels like I think I'm going to drop it. He said, oh, don't do that. You know, don't do that. Send it to me and I'll fix it up. Right. And I thought, ooh, okay, sure, Dave Stewart, you know?
Yeah.
So I sent it to him, and it was funny because then I didn't hear a thing. And, you know, you don't want to be presumptuous and be like, hey, where's my track? but eventually I had to, you know, we were on deadline and I had to say like, hey, where's my track? And he said, oh, I'm traveling. I'm in Nashville, but I'll send it to you and whatever. And he did. And it was funny. The changes he'd made, both versions, if you buy the deluxe CD, you get both. You get his single version, but you get the original album version. I think your average Joe might not hear the difference.
Right.
But I immediately, and the president of my label really was like, oh my God, it's a completely different song. This is a single now. And I'm, you know, I didn't hear it that way. Because it had become, I'd written it at my kitchen table the night before the last sessions, the in-person sessions, and really saw it as a kind of folky Smithsy, like very English.
Right.
And over the course of tracking it, it just became a rock and roll song. It just, you know, it wasn't what I envisioned. And that was part of my problem. Dave sent it back and he'd added some guitar and the mix was completely different and things popped in and out. And it was just, you know, look, this is a guy who knows how to make hit records.
Oh, absolutely. Right? Yeah.
And he didn't want anything for it, which is the amazing thing. He was just happy to have helped. You know,
right.
And the other thing was he was happy to lend his name to the project because, you know, look, if you dial up the official Spotify Dave Stewart playlist, it's there. You know, it pops up because he was, so it's going to get played forever just because it's got his name attached to it, which is incredibly special for me and leads people to me,
of
his
course,
fans
yeah.
to me. And not that we're all that similar, but I will tell a funny story that the guy who mixed the record, the guy, Dwayne Lundy, he was amazing, and really did make sense of what I called the jigsaw puzzle. He said, look, I got to know if you're spending time with Dave. He's friends with Bob Dylan. He was friends with Tom Petty. He was friends with George Harrison. He's friends with Ringo. He's, you know, I mean, he's Eurythmics and, you know, like, what is it about this guy?
Yeah.
And so, you know, after getting to know Dave a little bit, I said, you know what? It's all true. He was the one who was like, no, don't drop the song. I'm sure it's a great song. Let me hear. Oh, it's a great song. I can do something. You know, it's like, he's such a cheerleader, right? Yeah. He's got such a positive energy. He's nuts, but in like the old English eccentric, you know, like my great grandfather was nuts. It's like that kind of beautiful, you know, warm, you know, lovely nuts. But also he's an incredibly great hang. You know, he's fun to be around. If you're Bob Dylan or you're Tom Petty or you're George Harrison, it's hard to find people that are in your world that you can feel is a peer, but are also, you know, they don't want anything from you. They don't want to talk business. They're just fun to be around. I would imagine that's the basis of those relationships.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. It's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it, Jeff.
This was my pleasure. I wanted to do this. This was, you know, it seemed like kismet, you know, like how could we not have been connected previously?
I know.
Then, you know, I dialed up the show and I'm like, whoa. We're like, we're like kindred spirits here. This is bizarre.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I know.
It's crazy. So, yeah.
Yeah. So here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, brilliant. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And I will see you either in London or in New York.
Or both.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation with Jeff Slate. And what you're listening to now is Broken Without You, which features Dave Stewart on guitar. Please remember you can find albums and gigs on the blog at hilaryseabrook.blogger.com. I seem to be the only person that's still using Blogger, but I don't care. It works for me. And I hope you enjoy reading some of my reviews, and I hope you enjoy listening to Harmonious World. Please do get in touch with any comments you might have. And until the next episode, please share what you're good at. We're all sharing harmony.
The memories, nothing can erase. The memories can't be erased. 'Cause that's the way I live with 30 years of hurt. And my heart is broken without you.
Tu sais que je ne veux plus être si loin de toi. J'ai tant aimé te voir là-bas, oh je n'aime que ça.
When tomorrow comes, I will be there.
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.